Formula 1, the absolute technical peak of humankind, cutting edge engineering, the best drivers in the world, and Nikita Mazepin, the glitz and glamour of Monaco, the esteemed history of Silverstone, the pure, unfiltered passion of Monza. Everything about this sport is top of the tree, except when it really, really isn't. Today, we explore some of the worst excuses for F1 teams ever to grace the did not qualify sheet. First up, let's start with the best of the worst. Scuderia Coloni. Coloni entered 81 Grand Prix between 1987 and 1991. The reason I say entered and not competed is because they failed to qualify for 67 of those 81 races. However, from the outside looking in, the team wasn't actually that bad. They had management who had a decent amount of acumen when it came to running a Formula 1 team in Enzo Coloni, and he managed to get a pretty decent technical staff together to build the cars and got some respectable drivers behind the wheel, most notably touring car legend Gabriele Tarquini, future Ferrari driver Nicola Larini, and kart champ car mainstay Roberto Moreno. The big problem with Coloni was money. They had absolutely none. Their financial troubles were so great that development throughout the season simply never happened, purely because even if they did manage to design some new parts, they couldn't afford to get them fabricated. If a front wing or a rear wing got damaged, gaffer tape and steel mesh was usually the order of the day. In 1990, Coloni thought all of their prayers had been answered when Subaru, of World Rally Championship fame, came knocking with a deal that was simply too good for them to turn down. They offered a free factory engine, along with absorbing all of the debt Coloni had accrued simply trying to keep the team alive, in exchange for a 51% stake. Subaru even promised a normally aspirated flat 12 that the Ferrari and Alfa Romeo teams had boatloads of success with in the 1970s. Now, you may have noticed that 1990 is not in the 1970s, so the ferociously outdated concept, teamed with a gearbox bought from fellow perennial failures Minardi, didn't fly in 1990. Combine these two factors, and with a car that was 112 kilos outside the minimum weight, meant that Coloni failed to qualify for a race in the last 2 years of their short life. MasterCard Lola. Perhaps one of the most inept and ill-advised entrants in Formula 1 history, the MasterCard Lola team initially planned to enter into the complex and financially demanding world of Formula 1 in 1998. But then MasterCard said, "F*** it," and expedited their arrival into the paddock a full year ahead of schedule. So the development for their 1997 car started around the same time fellow newcomers, Stewart F1, had showcased their car to the public for the first time. Now, the reason why I put so much sarcastic sass on the word development is because not much of that actually happened. Understandably so, given they had roughly 3 months to get a car ready for a season in Formula 1. Lola, at the time, had an immaculate history building cars both in Formula 1 and outside it at the highest echelons of endurance racing. However, despite all this expertise, all this know-how, they were forced into using their IndyCar chassis. Lola then cut some bits out to make it lighter and stuck some bigger wings on it for Formula 1. Bish bash bosh, job done, and the T97/30 was born. So, Lola MasterCard arrived in Australia in March 1997 with a car that had never seen the inside of a wind tunnel, had never turned the wheel on track, had never actually done anything car related at all before first practice of the Australian Grand Prix. This didn't stop the bosses at Lola feeling bullish about their chances, saying they would absolutely qualify within the 107% time required to let them race. And would you believe it? They weren't even close. The car was 12 seconds a lap slower than the top teams, and 5 seconds outside the 107% threshold they needed to be able to enter the race. The car managed to suffer from the rare affliction of having too much drag to be quick in a straight line, and not enough downforce to be quick in the corners. The team collapsed with £6 million in debt after its failed venture into Formula 1 after one race. At the time, large rumours swirled about the motives behind the team, and why would a company like MasterCard put so much clean, totally legitimate money into a clearly doomed project? But MasterCard are clearly a massive financial company and made a simple but expensive mistake. Hispania Racing Team. A slightly more modern entry on this list, and one of the 3 teams who joined F1 in 2010, is HRT. Out of the gate, there were already doubts about HRT being able to fund their own team, with F1 boss at the time, Bernie Ecclestone, expressing that he doesn't think the team should be allowed an entry based on the fact that he doubts they'll be able to see the season out. As the winter drew to a close, it looked like good old Bernie might have been onto something, as HRT pulled out of their entire winter testing programme, and they probably won't be announcing who will be driving alongside Bruno Senna until the day before qualifying of the first race. This was to see who they could get to pay the highest amount for the seat alongside of the nephew of the greatest to ever do it. At the first round in Bahrain, Senna's car was barely completed in time for first practice, and even then he was only able to complete 3 slow-paced installation laps. During the second session, he was able to actually drive the car quickly, over 17 laps, but he was still 11 seconds off the pace, and his run out was ended when one of the wheels decided to fall off. Lovely. As the season wore on, an almost comic lack of reliability began to become the primary narrative, with both cars finishing only 8 of the 19 races. Also, some glaring design issues, which some would regard as the basics, began to show up. The HRT had almost no rear grip, a problem not helped by the fact that the exhaust outlet let the gas hot enough to melt aluminium directly onto the centre of the rear tyres. A truly wonderful idea. The next 2 seasons of abject misery both began with the team failing to qualify for the opening round in Australia, with a pattern of falling further and further behind the Mauritius and the Lotus Catherines as the years progressed. HRT never really improved, recovered, or gained any respectability in the sport, and for their entire tenure as F1's undisputed worst team of the early 2010s. Everyone, including those employed by them, seemed to just be waiting for the whole thing to die. Andrea Moda. The undisputed worst team that Formula 1 has ever seen has got to be Andrea Moda. A team so mind-bogglingly shit that they were banned from the sport for being so bad. They rose from the ashes of another team on this list, Scuderia Coloni, who at their lowest were bought by Italian shoe money man Andrea Sassetti, a man who was the very definition of more money than sense. Coloni, by the time he had bought them, had 7 full-time employees, a factory befitting the 1970s rather than the 1990s, and a car that had failed to qualify for a race in 2 years. However, he did pump quite a lot of money into his new team to bring it up to Formula 1 standards. Or so he thought. He increased the workforce to 40 people, but had apparently just taken people he already employed in his shoe manufacturing business who were trained mechanics and gave them a job in an F1 team. He also moved the team from Coloni's base in Perugia to Morovale. In a new facility, right? Nope. Half of the floor was for making shoes, half was for designing and building an F1 car. So things are going very well. Sassetti also realised that the Coloni chassis that he had just bought the rights to own would not get him anywhere, so he asked Simtech to design him a chassis which would be ready for the European leg of the upcoming season. He had entered into a contract with Judd to supply him with some nice V10s to plop into this chassis, but he had to use the Coloni chassis until the Simtech one was completed, which was designed to fit a V8. So he done what any F1 team boss would do and went to a local university and asked the students to make changes to this car to ensure that his new Judd V10 would fit. Again, only the best for Sassetti. The first race of the season in South Africa only served to heighten the ineptitude on display, as they were not allowed to take part in the event because they had forgotten to pay the entry fee and thus were turned away at the gates. At the Brazilian Grand Prix, Andrea Moda had already dispensed with the 2 drivers that were due to drive for them in the South African Grand Prix and had managed to rope Roberto Moreno and Perry McCarthy into driving for them. Enter Enrico Bertaggia, who was part of the original lineup due to race at South Africa. He came back to the team and said that he would offer $1 million in exchange for his seat back. The FIA intervened and told Andrea Moda that they had to retain their current lineup for the rest of the season, and they were becoming worried by the chop and change nature of their hiring programme. This incensed Sassetti, who obviously blamed McCarthy, who wasn't taking a salary to drive by the way. So he instructed mechanics to completely neglect McCarthy's car for the rest of the season, with the hope he'd simply resign. It's alleged that this got so out of hand that at the Belgian Grand Prix, Sassetti instructed his mechanics to fit a broken steering arm to McCarthy's car in the hopes that it would snap going up Eau Rouge, killing him and allowing him to make the cool milli he'd been offered by Bertaggia. Of course, this was never proven and thankfully never happened. Funnily enough, at the same race, Sassetti was arrested on charges of fraud. After this, the FAI had seen enough of this crazy Italian and his unbelievably shit team and hoofed him out of the sport. That said, they still arrived at the Italian Grand Prix trying to get in. Andrea Moda. What a team. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us with the mystical abyss that is the YouTube algorithm. Also hit the subscribe button as well. We'll be putting content out like this regularly, so make sure you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.